Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about this dust collection table. Super excited about it. It does everything that the miter saw stand doesn't do. We're going to talk about the functionality and how it does what it does. For now, we're just going to talk about the build. So I chose 40 inches high, just that's a comfortable working height for me. To do that, I took these 4x4s, I cut them 36 inches long. I also notched them out. I cut a notch to receive this 2x4. I was going to notch it on both sides, but I thought it might be too weak on the bottom. So I just notched it on one side. And then I cut these 2x4s. I cut 4 of them, 45 inches long, 4 of them, 48 inches long. And then I built these 2 squares, and then I built this cube. So now we have the cube. We have the basic frame of the big box. I got a smaller box on the other end, which we're also going to talk about a little later, and why it's important. So I started out building this from the bottom to top. First thing I put on was these 2 bottom pieces. I ended up cutting 3 of them because I didn't realize that the MDF is 49 inches by 97 inches. They give you an extra inch on each end. I didn't know that. So I measured from each end, assuming it was 48 inches. You might see it, it's kind of fast, but I did end up cutting 3 of these and only used 2. I used that other MDF for something later, but just keep that in mind if you're doing this. MDF is not 48 by 96. Anyway, after this, we finally get into the dust collection part. So initially I put this tube going along the bottom. 4-inch suction coming straight from my dust collection. Now, I changed that a little bit. So initially I put this pipe as low as possible so that it would accommodate any table saw. I just didn't like how low it was. I didn't want to bring the dust down and then all the way back up. So I moved it up as high as I could to still get underneath that table saw. I also have this dust collection right here. I'm trying to keep everything on the inside, so on the outside I can put drawers in here later and make this even more functional. So you can see the dust collection tube for the downdraft comes here. The dust collection tube from the table saw is going to come out to this back end right here, and then that keeps everything in the center. Once again, it gives me room for those drawers. Let's talk about this downdraft part of this table. Super excited about this part. I don't know what is the best size to build, what the best size holes are, so I'm going to really experiment with this, going through different things. I made it as big as possible to start out with because it would be easier to shrink it down than to make it bigger later on. So I started out by cutting this hole for this suction. Man, that hole saw did not like cutting through that 2x4. Maybe my hole saw is getting a little dull, or maybe it's just because it's going through pressure treated 2x4. But finally got through that after some work. And then I cut these at an angle. I used 2 different boards only because I didn't have one board that was wide enough, and I wanted a 2x material because I'm going to screw the MDF to it. And now I have the angles going on each side. You may notice this is a little bit offset. That's to allow the 2.5-inch hose that comes from my table saw to clear it on the other end. Let's look at the other end. All right, so this is the little box that attached to the big box. Now I did this so I can remove the table saw later with very little effect on this big box, because I might get a bigger, better table saw in the future. But for now, I'm going to use this little guy. So this is 24 by 24, and the height, I just measured the height so it would be just a little taller than this table. So anything that I'm cutting with the table saw, I can just push it off onto this table, so I don't have to set up some kind of stands or do some kind of balancing act. I just push it on this table, I'm done, it's cut, it's over. I built up these boards and I set angles as I built it up in order to accommodate my dust collection. So I got the 4-inch dust collection coming in down here. This hole is set up for the 2.5 dust collection port that is already on the table saw just for dust collection. This also allows that to move so I can do 45-degree cuts, and that hose will move with that dust collection boot. Now we're onto the downdraft table. So I decided to go with 2-inch circles for no good reason, and I'm going to space them out 6 inches apart. That way, if I find out, man, I wish I had twice as many holes, I have the space to put twice as many holes. So here's my grid layout. I did 2-inch by 2-inch, and then I marked 1, 2, 3, skip So every fourth line. Then if you look closely, you can see my pattern. The little circles, that's where I'm going to drill holes. All right, let's get to drilling. So many holes. I think I figured it out. All right, so what did we end up with? These 2-inch holes, that was just too big. I had to glue a board on the back of this board and put a 1-inch hole in the middle of those 2-inch holes so I could put more holes on this board so they weren't spaced so far apart and I still got a good suction. So what did I end up with? 31-inch holes that expand out to a 2-inch hole but are drawing the suction on a 1-inch hole. It'll make more sense when you see the pictures and you see what I'm doing. I got to glue one more board on the back here, drill some more 1-inch holes, but while I'm waiting for that glue to dry, now that I know the area that I'm working with, I can tighten that up. And I can angle it more toward that 4-inch pipe, making this thing more efficient and more effective. All right, here we go. You just saw me finish this bottom portion of this downdraft system. Now, onto the top part. What more could we do to this? Well, I got the 2-inch holes on the top, and I got the 1-inch holes in this bottom board. And then, just to make it a little better, I beveled the 2-inch holes on the top, and I beveled the 1-inch holes on the top and the bottom, creating kind of like a nozzle effect. All right, so how did it do? Well, I recorded video of it, but sanding the sawdust wasn't picking up when I was sanding. It's just so small and fine. But 99% of that sawdust was going straight in those holes. It would aggressively find those holes and went away. That was just for sanding. Everything else was just falling straight down. So for the jigsaw, the drill, circular saw, anything else, I need to create another thing to put on top of this table, which you'll see in part 2 when I finally get to part 2. I'm going to use this almost exclusively for sanding right now. So it's definitely meeting my needs, grabbing 99% of the dust. All right, so let's move on to how I set up the piping. As a temporary fix, I took one of these elbows attached to a hose and routed it to my dust collector. Well, this temporary solution, when I plugged it in there, seemed really easy, and I thought about making it permanent, and I did. Now, whichever one I want to use, if I want to use the downdraft table, I'll plug it into here. If I want to use the table saw, I plug it into here, and I'm done. This is how I ended up piping it. Really easy, really simple. One goes to the downdraft table, the other guy goes to the table saw. All right, let's talk about that table saw. Now the table saw, when I first cut boards, it did not do what it needed to do. So I started looking at it, and there's a lot of places for air to leak. Initially, I couldn't even feel air going around the blade. So I took a lot of these panels off, I wrapped it in this blue foam, and it performed quite a bit better. I ran this piece of plywood through several times, and very little sawdust was left over. Looked like it was catching about 92% of it as it was sucking down. The rest of it's popping up over the blade as it cuts, and I don't think I'm going to catch that unless I put some kind of contraption over the blade, which I don't want to do. So I'm just going to live with that 8% sawdust and clean it up. All right, guys, this brings us to the end of this table build, at least part 1. So it's functional, I'm going to use it for a while, and then I may make a part 2 where I make it prettier, put some drawers, and make some improvements. Don't forget to subscribe and share, and don't forget, if you want to buy the stuff that I bought to do my table, look in the descriptions below. I got cool links that makes me money while not costing you a dime. All right, guys, till next time.